Hello again. You are listening to the Latin American Perspectives podcast. My name is Armando Alvarez, Outreach Coordinator, and I will be the commentator in this new installment featuring our newest issue in LAP, titled Urban Latin America: Violence, Enclaves, and Struggles for Land. This new issue of LAP is set for release in March 2013, Volume 40, Number 2, Issue 189. You can view the cover image at our website at www.latinamericanperspectives.com. I have with me from New York the issue editor, Tom Angotti. He is a professor of urban affairs and planning at Hunter College and the Graduate Center at the City University of New York, and director of the Hunter College Center for Community Planning and Development. He's also author of many books, including The New Century of the Metropolis, and also a participating editor of our journal, Latin American Perspectives. Tom, how are you?
Hi, Armando. How are you? Good to be here.
I'm good. Thanks for asking. Good to have you here. Our other participant is an author of one of the articles published in this issue, Alfonso Valenzuela Aguilera. He is a professor of urban planning at the State University of Morelos in Mexico. He holds degrees in urban planning by the University Institute of Architecture of Venice and PhD in urbanism by UNAM in Mexico. He is a consultant on urban revitalization strategies to the UN Economic Commission for Latin America and has been a visiting scholar to a number of universities. He is currently a visiting scholar at the Institute of Social Science at the University of Lisbon in Portugal. Welcome, Alfonso.
Thank you.
Thanks for being with us. Tom, I'd like to begin by asking you some questions about urban Latin America. There's no doubt that the region was once very rural, but now has transformed into an urban area with many global cities, such as Mexico City, Rio de Janeiro, and Buenos Aires. Now, these cities are considered to be part of the broader global economic system, and from a preliminary discussion on urban affairs, many might think that the urbanizing of Latin America is a good thing. So my first question is, what positions have urban experts expressed, and what are the actual effects that we are seeing in urban Latin America?
Well, Latin America is one of the most urbanized regions in the world, and very often people think that that's part of the bigger problems of Latin America. And what I think we really need to do is put everything in its broader context. The problems are both urban and rural, and it's not the cities that have caused the problems. They're the scene of some of the larger social, political, and economic problems. So this is what I call the urban fallacy, the idea that the cities are the problem, and the corresponding part of that fallacy is that changing the cities will be the solution to follow. And the fact of the matter is that there are broader social, economic, and political issues, and change in those arenas are necessary to alter the way that people live in cities and in rural areas as well. So the theme issue brings out what I believe are the three fundamental broader issues. One is violence, that's both urban and rural, and that is part of the long history of Latin America and the use of military and police to repress civic and political organizing and democratic development. The second one is segregation and enclaves, and that is the development of cities and rural areas as exclusive, socially exclusive, economically exclusive, residential and commercial and industrial territories. And then the third one is struggles for land. And really, the urban question is basically a question of who controls the land, how is the land used, and that's the same question that has plagued rural areas for the last 500 years. And it's the struggles for land. And in these struggles, especially for the last 150 years, the fundamental element has been the role of capital. Capital has driven people out of rural areas and into large urban metropolitan regions, and the role of capital in cities has deep effect on the quality of life where people live and work.
In this issue, you allude to how the history of the region, in fact, plays an important role in urban Latin America. Can you share with us why it is imperative that we look at the past before we begin to address the present?
Yes, it's important because very often the conversation sounds like the urban problems just are contemporary and they just happened recently, and they only happened when cities grew to such large sizes and included the majority of the population. If we go back to colonial history, the cities have always been the center of power. Even before colonialism, pre-Columbian cities were centers of power, and but particularly since the colony, the cities have had separate enclaves. They were established through the use of violence, and the struggles have always been over the control of land, first by the colonial occupiers, and then later on by the maturing bourgeoisies. In the 20th century, the growth of large metropolitan regions in what I call dependent urbanization has a lot to do with the concentration of capital in small number of export-based industries, the export-based economy, dependent capitalism, which leads to dependent urbanization. And that is another important phase. And the final and most important part of the history is the transformation since the 1980s with the neoliberal turn and the growth of global financial centers that consolidates one very strong trend that was apparent from the beginning, which is the concentration of capital in a small number of relatively densely developed nodes.
Now, for a lot of our listeners reading who might be interested in subscribing or purchasing this issue, I'm sure that they would like to know what sort of insights can a reader acquire in this issue of Latin American perspectives about urban Latin America. Can you pinpoint a couple?
There are a variety of articles, many of them contemporary, that deal with urban Latin America. And I put them into three major categories. The first, dealing with violence. Alfonso Valenzuela's excellent article opens up the issue of comparing the way the state deals with violence in different countries. And then there are three pieces on Mexico City that go into some detail, giving different views of the response of the state to violence and how it relates to real estate development and urban growth policies, policing and segregation of neighborhoods, and how that all relates to the larger question of violence and urban development. The second major group of articles is around what I call enclave urbanism, segregation of neighborhoods and districts within large metropolitan regions and many smaller ones as well. So there are case studies from Puerto Rico, Colombia, Brazil, involving gated communities and separate industrial and commercial districts. And the third area is what I call dualisms and orientalisms. The dualist approach to the city divides it into the formal city, the informal city, the planned city, and the unplanned city, or the developed, modern, wealthier city versus what are often called the slums, the barrios and the favelas. And this dualist approach has an important effect on and intersects with state policies, urban policies. So there are several articles that deal with this approach. There's an article by Alexis Cortez that compares the way the so-called marginal populations are understood and seen both by the left and the social movements and by the elite. It's called Pobladores y Favelados, comparing Chile and Brazil. And there's an excellent piece by Daniel Renfrew about cultural politics of lead poisoning in Uruguay. And so these are some of the 14 articles in the issue, and I think they offer a contemporary and very critical and broad view of the diverse discussions and debates about cities in Latin America today.
Thank you very much, Tom. To showcase one of our articles in the issue, I'd like to turn to our participating author who can share with us a little more about what this issue has to offer. Alfonso, you have an article in this issue titled Urban Surges, Power, Territory, and the Social Control of Space in Latin America. Can you tell us what your article is about?
Certainly. The article examines the impact that delinquency and organized crime is having within the urban realm. So we find many studies dealing with the social, economic, and institutional dimensions of violence in Latin America, but we are claiming that the problem has turned territorial in nature. On the one hand, governments in the regions have privileged territorial control to the use of force, that is, occupation, surveillance, fortification of urban space, etc., as Tom just said. And this government have had limited success, to say the least, since it has resulted in the weakening of the state's institutions while simultaneously increasing violence. On the one hand, we cannot talk about a punitive state where the government exerts control over the underclass, as Wacan claims, but what we find in Latin America is a symbiotic state where institutions merge with organized crimes through complex networks, thus making impossible to reduce violence.
In your article, Alfonso, you focus on the three state institutions of Mexico, Colombia, and Brazil. What can you conclude from a general point of view to share with our listeners about their responses?
Yes, we draw four parallels among the three cases, and we are emphasizing the spatial and territorial implications of their current security policies. First, we look at issues of power and legitimacy, because all three cases have a recent past of governmental authoritarianism, corruption, and impunity, as well as a lack of institutional respectability, let's say. To a greater or lesser degree, there's these symbiotic relationships between organized crime and institutions would make it hard to deal with crime. The second parallel is the strengthening of coercive responses, and we're looking here at the rise of the punitive state, in which large-scale acts of so-called legitimate violence do not improve security, but are used instead to control the population, and which in many cases favor certain economic and political groups. This hardening of governmental responses is evident in Brazil, for example, which has a complex history of paramilitary groups, militias, and cartels. But it is even more dramatic in Mexico, where the government already acknowledges 70,000 people dead and 26,000 people reported as missing, all tied to drug trafficking in the last 5 years. The third parallel we found is this dissociation between the political class and the citizenry, where politicians are not committed to long-term goals regarding security issues, and they usually have at stake their political careers, for which they rather protect many times financial capital interests, even if they hinder social welfare aims with it. The fourth and last parallel addresses new forms of social control, and we conclude that, for example, the case of Brazil, the militarized option prevails, and in such interventions in favelas with the military are being used as means of controlling the population, which may compromise the World Cup and the Olympic Games in the coming years. And in the case of Mexico, we find that there's a new era of urban surges which intend to regain territories from the drug cartels, and which they have little chance to succeed so far. While in the case of Colombia, we'll find social action actually has lower crime rates and has allowed citizens to regain territorial control of their environment. And this has been all through the acknowledgement of social needs and the reconstruction of the rule of law.
Thank you, Alfonso. Your article promises to be very interesting. Well, that concludes our podcast, and I want to thank both of you for your time and sharing your work with us.
Thank you, Armando.
Again, this issue is titled Urban Latin America, Violence, Enclaves, and Struggles for Land. It would be available in March 2013. It is issue 189, volume 40, number 2. I'd like to thank our listeners for their time. For more things LAP, check us out on our publisher's webpage, lap.sagepub.com. We are also on Facebook at facebook.com/LAPjournal. or follow us on Twitter at twitter.com/LA Perspectives. My name is Armando. Thanks for listening. Until next time.